All aboard!
Welcome to the Storytime Train. Please subscribe to enjoy more videos.
The Little Snowplow by Laura Kohler, illustrated by Jake Parker. On the mighty mountain road crew, the trucks came in one size. Big. That is, until a new snowplow joined the crew. "You're such a little snowplow," the big truck said. "Leave the heavy lifting to us," and off they roared. So, all spring, the little snowplow cleared streams while the big trucks bulldozed mudslides. In the summer, he cleaned up after parades while the big trucks built roads. In the fall, he pushed leaves into piles while the big trucks mounded mountains of salt and sand. As fall turned into winter, the little snowplow began training. He made the light on top go around and blew his horn. Beep, beep! He drove forward and back. Then he raised and lowered his plow 10 times, fast. Everything was in working order. He could hardly wait for snow. "Ha!" said the dump truck. "You've never even seen snow." The little snowplow ignored him. He knew what snow was. "Why, I remember snow up to the eaves," said a cement mixer. "Yeah, we had a big, strong snowplow then," the garbage truck said. "Too bad she retired," the utility truck said. "I heard she moved to a beach in Florida." "I hope it doesn't snow like that this winter," the dump truck said. "It might be too much for a little snowplow. We'd probably have to help." The little snowplow turned his bumper on the trucks. But that night, he raised and lowered his plow 10 extra times. And the next day, he added even more exercises. He pushed loads of gravel. He pulled blocks of concrete, just in case. One morning, Will, the road crew foreman, burst in before dawn. "It's a real blizzard out there." The dump truck snorted. "Looks like there's already more than a little snowplow can handle." Beep, beep, vroom. The drifts looked soft and fun to the little snowplow. "Let's go," Will said. They drove out into the storm. The little snowplow cleared the streets of Mighty Mountain, but it kept snowing. So the little snowplow cleared the streets of Mighty Mountain again. It snowed harder, and the winds began to howl. Once more, the little snowplow started to clear the streets. Deep drifts swirled around his treads. Icy gusts blew against his windshield. Snow piled up higher than he could raise his plow. He wondered if he should have done more plow lifts. "This one's too big for anyone to handle on their own," Will said. He called for backup. "I knew that plow would need help," the dump truck grumbled as he drove out. The little snowplow wiped his windshield and kept plowing. Silver Fork, Stampede Avenue, Main Street. That's when he heard a rumbling. He saw the dump truck drive by. Then the little snowplow heard a thundering. He turned the corner on Main and Ridge. Just as an avalanche swept down the mountain. Whoosh! "Beep, beep, beep!" the little snowplow cried. "He's buried!" Will yelled. "No time to lose!" "But it will take hours for the big trucks to move that boulder." The little snowplow drove forward. He backed up. He repositioned. He edged forward and squeezed past the boulder. "Way to go, Half Pint," Will said. "The big trucks couldn't have gotten through." The little snowplow plunged his plow into the avalanche debris. He dug and dug and dug. His engine shuddered. His exhaust sputtered. The needle on his gas gauge dropped. Will pointed. There he is! The little snowplow dug faster. Creak! Crack! More snow crashed behind him. Hurry, Will said. Shovels of snow flew in all directions. Will raced to attach a cable between the trucks. The little snowplow drove forward, tugging. The dump truck revved his engine, his wheels spun. The little snowplow braced himself and pulled, just as he had practiced. The dump truck's wheels gained traction. The little snowplow gave a mighty tug and pulled the dump truck free. Wahoo! Will cheered. The dump truck shook snow from his truck bed. I didn't know a snowplow so little could be so strong, he said. Beep, beep. The little snowplow blew his horn. Together, the two trucks worked to clear the boulder. When they finally got back to the garage, all the other trucks honked and beeped and blinked. Great job, they shouted. The little snowplow's headlights sagged. His plow dragged. His gas tank was nearly empty. But before turning in for the night, he made the light on top go around. He blew his horn. Beep, beep. He drove forward and back. Then he raised and lowered his plow 10 times slow. Everything was in working order. He could hardly wait for sleep. The end. Pie Snowman by Valerie Gorbachev. Pinky had a job to do for Mommy. To get a pizza with all their favorite toppings. He made a poem so he wouldn't forget. Mushrooms, mozzarella cheese, fresh tomatoes, onions, and peas. All of a sudden, bop! A snowball hit Pinky on the head. Pinky's friends, the squirrel boys, were throwing snowballs from their tree. Play with us, they said. Can't, said Pinky. I'm getting a pizza for my mommy. Mushrooms, mozzarella cheese, fresh tomatoes, onions, and peas. But the squirrel boys weren't listening. Bop! Another snowball hit Pinky on the head. Stop! Pinky shouted, and he kicked the tree with all his might. The tree shook, and snow fell, covering Pinky from top to bottom. But Pinky didn't notice. He had other things on his mind. Mushrooms, mozzarella cheese, fresh tomatoes, onions, and peas. Down the road, the Skunk Sisters were building a snowman. That snowman is even better than ours, said one of the sisters. What does she mean? Pinky wondered. But he was in too much of a rush to find out. Mushrooms, mozzarella cheese, fresh tomatoes, onions, and peas. On Main Street, Pinky saw Mr. and Mrs. Wagner and their boy Ben. He saw Mrs. Schnauzer and Mr. Mutton. All of them were abuzz with excitement. A walking snowman, he heard them say. Where? Pinky wondered. Pinky turned the corner and heard again. A walking snowman! Pinky looked all around him. Where? Where? Outside the bakery, Mr. Withers, Ms. Muzzle, and Mr. Digger, and even the baker himself were all talking about the snowman. And in front of the pharmacy, Officer Barker reported the walking snowman to headquarters. Pinky wanted to see the snowman too, but he didn't have a moment to spare. He had reached the pizzeria at last. Pinky rushed in and shouted, Mushrooms! mozzarella cheese, fresh tomatoes, onions, and peas. One of the Coniglio twins was so startled he dropped his dishes. A walking, talking snowman! Pinky didn't even notice. Mushrooms, mozzarella cheese, fresh tomatoes, onions, and peas. Mr. Coniglio laughed. A pizza pie snowman! Recognizing the pink little snout, Mr. Coniglio went to the kitchen to make Pinky's pizza. And while Pinky waited in the warm room, the snow that surrounded him started to melt. By the time the pizza was ready, the snowman was all gone, and a wet little boy stood in its place. Pinky ran as fast as a small boy with a large pizza could. "Did you see the walking snowman?" asked Mr. Mutt as Pinky went by. Home in a flash, Pinky proudly delivered the pizza to Mommy. It had mushrooms, mozzarella cheese, fresh tomatoes, onions, and peas, and it was still hot. And after their delicious lunch, Pinky and Mommy took a stroll into town. They wanted to see the walking snowman too. The end. Snowflakes Fall by Patricia McLaughlin, illustrated by Stephen Kellogg. After the flowers are gone, snowflakes fall, flake after flake after flake. Each one a pattern all its own, no two the same, all beautiful. Snowflakes fall to sit on gardens and evergreen trees, on the fur of dogs and the tongues of laughing children. No two the same, all beautiful. Snowflakes fall, drift and swirl together like the voices of children. Snowflakes fall on a winding river's sandy banks, on a hilltop town, on its ancient church, on its loved library, and its familiar flagpole. When snowflakes fall at night, wailing winds may blow, and frantic, icy snowflakes scratch the window glass. Branches fly and shadows darken dreams. But then, when we wake in the morning light, surprise! The world shines. Snowflakes fall to quilt meadows, so we see the wandering prints of birds, rabbits, the bobcat at dawn, and the footprints of small red boots, making sled paths, and snowmen, and forts, and fields of snow angels. And when the snowflakes melt in quiet sun, they fill the chattering streams, flowing, rushing, sending drops of water up to fall as rain on places of where the snowflakes had been, where soon flowers will grow again. And when the flowers bloom, the children remember the snowflakes. And we remember the children, no two the same, all beautiful. The end. The Gruffalo's Child by Julia Donaldson, pictures by Axel Scheffler. The gruffalo said that no gruffalo should ever set foot in the deep, dark wood. Why not? Why not? Because if you do, the big bad mouse will be after you. I met him once, said the gruffalo. I met him a long, long time ago. What does he look like? Tell me, Dad. Is he terribly big and terribly bad? I can't quite remember, the gruffalo said. Then he thought for a minute and scratched his head. The big bad mouse is terribly strong, and his scaly tail is terribly long. His eyes are like pools of terrible fire, and his terrible whiskers are tougher than wire. One snowy night, while the gruffalo snored, the gruffalo's child was feeling bored. The gruffalo's child was feeling brave, so she tiptoed out of the gruffalo cave. The snow fell fast and the wind blew wild. Into the wood went the gruffalo's child. Aha! Oh-ho! A trail in the snow! Whose is this trail and where does it go? A tail poked out of a log pile house. Could this be the tail of the big bad mouse? Out slid the creature, his eyes were small. And he didn't have whiskers. No, none at all. You're not the mouse.
Not I, said the snake. He's down by the lake, eating gruffalo cake.
The snow fell fast and the wind blew wild. I'm not scared, said the gruffalo's child. Aha! Oh-ho! Marks in the snow! Whose are these claw marks? Where do they go? Two eyes gleamed out of a treetop house. Could these be the eyes of the big bad mouse? Down flew the creature, his tail was short, and he didn't have whiskers of any sort. You're not the mouse.
To-hoo! Not I, but he's somewhere nearby, eating gruffalo pie.
The snow fell fast and the wind blew wild. I'm not scared, said the gruffalo's child. Aha! Oh-ho! A track in the snow! Whose is this track and where does it go? Whiskers at last! And an underground house. Could this be the home of the big bad mouse? Out slunk the creature. His eyes weren't fiery. His tail wasn't scaly. His whiskers weren't wiry. You're not the mouse.
Oh no, not me. He's under a tree, drinking gruffalo tea.
It's all a trick, said the gruffalo's child as she sat on a stump where the snow lay piled. I don't believe in the big bad mouse. But here comes a little one out of his house. Not big, not bad, but a mouse at least. You'll taste good as a midnight feast.
Wait,
said the mouse.
Before you eat, there's a friend of mine that you ought to meet. If you'll let me hop onto a hazel twig, I'll beckon my friend so bad and big.
The gruffalo's child unclenched her fist. The big bad mouse? So he does exist. The mouse hopped into the hazel tree. He beckoned and said,
Just wait and see.
Out came the moon. It was bright and round. A terrible shadow fell onto the ground. Who is this creature so big, bad, and strong? His tail and his whiskers are terribly long. His ears are enormous, and over his shoulder he carries a nut as big as a boulder. "The big bad mouse!" yelled the gruffalo's child. The mouse jumped down from the twig and smiled.
Aha! Oh-ho! Prints in the snow. Whose are these footprints? Where do they go?
The footprints led to the Gruffalo cave, where the Gruffalo's child was a bit less brave. The Gruffalo's child was a bit less bored. And the Gruffalo snored and snored and snored. The end. Curious George in the Snow by Margaret and H.A. Rays. Illustrated in the style of H.A. Ray by Fifpa Interactive. This is George. George was a good little monkey and always very curious. One cold day, George went to a winter sports competition with his friend, the man with the yellow hat. They were outside all morning and wanted to warm up with a hot drink. At the ski lodge on the top of the mountain, the man said, "George, why don't you wait at the table while I get some hot chocolate? I'll be right back, so don't get into any trouble." George liked being on top of the mountain. There was so much to see. Why, there was something interesting. George thought it looked like a spaceship. He was curious. What was a spaceship doing on a mountain? George forgot all about waiting for the hot chocolate and climbed in. A man in a racing suit saw him and said, "What are you doing in my sled?" He tried to stop George, but it was too late. The sled shot down the mountain with George inside. "This is no spaceship," thought George. "This is a rocket." "Stop that monkey!" the man yelled. But George could not stop, and there was no one to stop him as he sped faster and faster through the snow. Suddenly, the sled slipped sideways. George didn't know how to steer. The sled swished through some trees and whacked into a pole. Luckily, George was not hurt, but this was not where he was supposed to be. Now, how would he get up the mountain? George looked at the sled. It was stuck by the pole. He looked up the pole. Now he could see how a little monkey could get to the top of the mountain. George climbed the pole, and when an empty seat came close enough, he jumped. What a view! From up in the air, George could see everything. As he rode up the mountain, he watched tiny skiers race down. When he reached the top, George was happy to see the ski lodge. This was where he was supposed to be. George found the table, but he couldn't find the man with the yellow hat. Where could he be? George looked down the mountain. There was someone who looked like his friend. Maybe his friend was going down to get George. But how could George get down the mountain this time? If only he had another sled. Why, here was a monkey-sized sled. George took the sled down and gave himself a push. The sled was quick to pick up speed on the steep mountain. George zigged this way and that way, then another way altogether. He flew over a hill and landed on the raceway. "It's a monkey!" yelled a boy, and the crowd cheered. "Look out, little monkey!" someone yelled from the crowd. But George was going so fast that the wind roared in his ears and he could not hear. But George could see. He saw a skier right in front of him. Could he stop? No! The crowd gasped as George crashed into the skier and flew up in the air. The skier went tumbling and his ski snapped right in half. Then George came down. He landed on the broken ski and kept going. The crowd was amazed. What is he doing? They asked. Is he skiing? Is he sledding? He's surfing in the snow, said a boy. George sailed down the mountain and came to a smooth stop. What a show! The crowd cheered as George took a bow. No one had seen skiing like this before. When the skier arrived, everyone was glad to see that he was not hurt, and they cheered for him too. Soon the man with the yellow hat arrived. He was glad to find George. George was glad to finally find his friend. The man with the yellow hat made his way through the noisy crowd to apologize to the skier. I'm sorry George caused so much trouble, he said. That's okay, said the skier. I still have another race and another pair of skis. Then he said, that was some skiing, George. Later that day, the skier raced again and won. It was a new record. The crowd went wild. They were still cheering when the skier found George at the finish line. Thanks to you, George, this big crowd stayed to cheer me on, he said. I couldn't have won without them, or you. He lifted George to his shoulders and the crowd cheered once more for their favorite monkey skier, George. The end.
Thanks for riding the Storytime Train. Please subscribe to enjoy more adventures.